This is the story of how one man endured trials and tribulations that would cause most of us to collapse. Later in life, people would look at his success and say that he got lucky. But once you know the story behind the story, you might decide luck had nothing to do with it. Today's story is called The Courage to Keep Going.
Season 4 of The Story features 8 veteran trailblazers whose sacrifices and service changed the world. The story is brought to you exclusively by Salesforce, the world's #1 customer relationship management platform. More than 150,000 businesses are using Salesforce to blaze their own trails to success. You can learn more by clicking the link in our show notes. And now, on to the story.
The man grew up in a small and slow Midwestern town. The second he was old enough to leave, he got in his car, drove away, and never looked back. He drove north and enrolled in the University of Michigan. Soon after he started school, Pearl Harbor was attacked.
President Roosevelt said in a statement today that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, from the air.
The U.S. declared war, and he dropped out and enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps. It was 1943, and that small division of the Army would eventually spin out into the United States Air Force. In those days, you didn't need a degree to get promoted rapidly in the military. Work ethic, competency, and confidence mattered, so the young man got promoted. Soon he became an officer. His specialty was meteorology, and he got shipped to Alaska. During his training, he met a wonderful girl, the two started dating, and they married soon after. Being stationed in Alaska was cold, but it was safe. The years passed, and soon, the death and destruction of World War II was over. The end of the war brought relief, but it also brought the man a nagging question. What was next for him? He decided to think bigger. He ignored the conventional wisdom that said to finish his undergraduate degree. Instead, he summoned the courage to enroll in advanced graduate courses at Caltech. In those days, prerequisites didn't keep you trapped. You could take any course you paid for, but you better be prepared to sink or swim. It was a doggy paddle at first, but he managed to swim. He was getting by, and after he felt confident enough, he used his graduate-level courses to sneak into Harvard Law School, where he graduated magna cum laude. In the military, he learned to play cards. At Harvard, he became so successful at gambling that he began to turn his attention towards a larger gambling arena, the stock market. Later, he would reminisce on those times when he learned how to fold and when to hold. And he would say, what you have to learn is to fold early when the odds are against you. Or, if you have a big edge, back it heavily because you don't get a big edge often. Opportunity comes, but it doesn't come often, so seize it when it does come. When he left Harvard, he returned to California and practiced law. For a moment, life was good. He and his wife were happily married. They were only 21 though, and by now, at age 29, with 3 children, it was clear that the marriage wasn't working. Divorce followed, which in those days carried a huge stigma. His wife got almost everything, including their house. He didn't have much money left, and the man had to move into a small apartment and purchase an old yellow beat-up Pontiac. His daughter sometimes was embarrassed to ride around with him, and she would ask, why did they have to drive such a horrible car? Her father told her it was, and I quote, to discourage gold diggers. Each day, the man summoned the courage to keep working hard. He worked like crazy all week to try and make the money back that he had lost in his divorce. On Saturdays, he would take his children to the zoo and try to forget how exhausted he was. The months passed, and a year later, his 9-year-old son, Teddy, got sick. The diagnosis came in. It was leukemia. In those days, there was no treatment and no medical insurance. The man took care of his 2 other children, practiced law, and then took Teddy to the hospital for checkups. Each visit grew harder and harder. Teddy was literally shrinking and growing weaker by the day. After the hospital visits, the man would walk home sobbing. Eventually, the man brought his dying son Teddy home. They tried to go to the beach and play with his friends, but eventually, Teddy would go to the beach and sit on the sand. He couldn't even move. After 11 months of struggle, Teddy passed away. The man was heartbroken. He looked at his available options. He thought about giving up and turning to vices to get by. So many of the people around him did it, and nobody would have blamed him. Instead, at 31, broke and heartbroken, he decided to keep going. Later, he would reflect on all those emotions that he easily could have given into and say, generally speaking, envy, resentment, revenge, and self-pity are disastrous modes of thought. Self-pity gets fairly close to paranoia, and paranoia is one of the very hardest things to reverse. You do not want to drift into self-pity. Self-pity will not improve the situation. The heartbreak would never leave him. But soon he met a new woman. The two started talking, and they had a lot in common. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, and so did he. The 6 of them pulled together and became a family. Life was finally starting to look up. The optimism was short-lived. His father suddenly passed away. When the man returned home to Nebraska to help his family through the tough time, a friend insisted that he meet with a quirky Midwestern investor. The 2 of them hit it off, and they remained in close contact after the man returned to California. Back in California, he left his job to start his own law firm with a focus on real estate. It wasn't long before he stopped practicing law entirely and began to focus on investments and management. The years went by, and his skill as an investor grew. Now his investments were delivering an annual return of over 20%, compared to the average market rate of just 5%. Ambition stirred within him again, but adversity was right behind it. He faced 2 years of heavy investment losses, and his instincts told him to fold. He was 50 years old when he closed his investment partnership. But that wasn't all. A few years later, he developed cataracts so bad that he had to get surgery. The surgery left him blind in one eye and caused complications and a downgrowth, which is similar to cancer. His blind eye throbbed with pain that was so intense that he couldn't stand up. Desperate to end it, he had the doctor remove his entire eye. Now, at this point, some people might find an attorney and sue the hospital. Instead, he carefully reflected on the situation and said, "A new and better operation had been invented, but I didn't pay attention. I just went along with the doctor that recommended the old one that he knew how to do." The new type of surgery had a complication rate of no more than 2%, while the surgery I had a 5% complication rate. The man who did the first operation, I won't tell you his name, a perfectly nice guy, our family eye doctor. I made the mistake. The fault was mine. He went back to investing, this time stepping up his game. He would later join the hospital's board of directors, invest in it, and turn it into a thriving and profitable business. His struggles had taught him to be careful, calculated, and forward-thinking. Throughout this time, he was building up a friendship with that quirky Midwestern investor that he had met years ago at his father's funeral in Nebraska. By this time, the man had developed such an aptitude for investing that he became that quirky investor's investment advisor. The two started investing together, first buying stock in a textile company, but that business soon started to wane. Then the two began to double down and invest in other businesses. While they went along, they decided to keep the name of that failing textile business for their holding company. The name was Berkshire Hathaway. The man was Charlie Munger, and his quirky investor friend was Warren Buffett. One of Munger's pieces of wisdoms and reflections later on was that I constantly see people rise in life who are not the smartest, sometimes not even the most diligent, but they are learning machines. They go to bed every night a little wiser than they were when they woke up, and boy, does that help, particularly when you have a long run ahead of you. Today, Berkshire Hathaway has an annual revenue of around $250 billion. Charlie and his quirky friend, Warren Buffett, are 2 of the richest men in the world. Munger went through his own personal hell before he turned his life around. Charlie Munger was a student, a family man, a soldier, a meteorologist, a lawyer, a business owner, and an investment advisor before he ever found his way to Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway. Excuses are always waiting. Self-pity, doubt, and tragedy all lurk. At any point, Munger could have succumbed to them, but he didn't. He could have become spiteful, but instead, he squeezed every ounce of learning out of his adversities. Charlie Munger forced those events to serve him, and not the other way around. Life and the world can be hellish sometimes. Winston Churchill famously said, "If you're going through hell, keep going. There's always a way up and out. If you are persistent enough, and have the courage not to quit, you'll find it. That's his story. What's yours going to be?
Thanks for listening to The Story. If you love this and want more, tap subscribe to make sure you don't ever miss an episode. The Story is brought to you exclusively by Salesforce, the world's #1 customer relationship management platform. More than 150,000 businesses are using Salesforce to blaze their own trails to success. The Story is created by The Mission, a veteran-owned media company and podcast network. We create custom branded podcasts for world-class companies like Salesforce, Twilio, and Katera. To learn more, head over to themission.co and subscribe to our daily newsletter.